All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm John Grange. I'm with Move Venture Capital, Nebraska Startup Academy, CTO of Ops Compass, a startup here, do a number of things. Very happy that everybody came down to hang out. Talking to Tom Chapman here. As it happens, Tom is a very good buddy of mine. We go back like probably, 17, maybe 18 years even?
Yeah.
Tom is co-founder and CEO of a company called Peeq Pro. You know, Scale Omaha is really all about providing a venue for people in the ecosystem to hear about, learn and learn more about how people that have actually built and scaled things here, and really people that have become mainstays in the ecosystem. Like, what got you into startups? What was it like to scale the thing you scaled? Kind of hearing those war stories from folks that have been there before. So very excited to talk to Tom because he's currently building and scaling. I can tell you at Move Venture Capital, we're an investor in Peeq Pro, and Tom's company is doing very well. We're really excited about it. We'll talk a little bit more about it's not the easiest company and concept to scale, so there's a lot there. But Tom also is unique in that part of the reason why we've known each other for so long is that he's been deeply involved in the ecosystem and startups and finance and community development, investing, all these things for a really long time, and that's how our paths have crossed. So I'm hoping that today we can kind of cover the ground on, kind of how Peeq has gotten to where it has and like what have been the challenges of scaling it, but also how did you, get to where you are, go from, being a kid who grew up here in Omaha to being really a key cog in the startup ecosystem here and building like a cool company. So I'm excited about it.
Cool. Can I tell you guys a little bit about Peeq Pro? Yeah? All right. So I'm going to ask a quick question. Who brushed their teeth today? I see a couple people didn't raise their hands, so we're going to have some other questions, but let's just assume most of us did. So now I want you to think about why you brushed your teeth. And I think all of you probably instantly went, I don't want bad breath. I don't want to have gunk on them, et cetera, et cetera. The actual reason is your mom, your dad, or your guardian, or whoever, at age 3 to 5, convinced you to do it every day. They said, you need to go up and do that. So, who peeked their eyelids, which means washed their eyelids today? So, it's a little unfair in this audience, because that is way higher than normal. So, the actual number of people that wash their eyelids every day is under 1%. So here's why you should. So how many people work in front of a computer? So if you work in front of a computer, you don't blink. You blink 30% of what you're supposed to do. Anybody here spend time in air conditioning? You have air blowing over your eyes. So it's causing damage to your eyes and it's causing something called evaporative dry eye. Anybody on birth control, beta blockers, antidepressants, skin stuff, go through the list. Essentially, every 21st century medicine at about 3 to 6 says dry eye is one of the side effects. Dry eye in the United States has gone from 3 million people to 40 million people in 20 years. And 71% of adults have the precursor. Essentially, what that means is all but 10% of adult Americans have this disease, and it's debilitating if you get acute dry eye. It means you don't go outside. So the studies essentially say that if you have dry eye in an acute way, you will lose all of your friends. Not because you're a bad person, not because your eyes are bad, because you can never go out of your house to see them. That's terrible. That's what gets me excited. My wife, who's my co-founder, and the other co-founder, Chris Wolf, are doctors, and they say, there's all these other things. Corneal abrasions. You have mites that live in your lashes, and if you don't blink enough, they kind of get out there and they start pooping closed your glands. Like, there's all this gross stuff in your eyelids that gets people excited to wash them because they're like, this is disgusting, particularly when eating pizza. So we started the company about 7 or 8 years ago thinking the problem was a product problem. If it was a product problem, it actually is kind of easy to explain to people because you just go, yeah, this is an electric toothbrush, you wash your eyelids. So over on that table, you can go see the first devices that we built. They're called the Peeq Wave. But in fact, it's a problem of compliance. No moms are telling their kids, and none of your people are telling you to wash your eyelids. So what we discovered was we needed to put workflows and software around that conversation so that we could coach people to do this. So if I want a doctor to sell you our stuff, the doctor has to put it in your hands. Do you know how we know? Because we spent a year trying to figure out how to get it doing, and we would just watch doctors, and we'd be like, why is Drew Bateman so much better than Cheryl Chapman? And it's because Drew put it in his patient's hands. So we're like, Cheryl, we want you to do that. Suddenly, my wife's rate of buy is 94%. 94% of people with dry eye walk out of her office with a product. Average, 11%. Great, they have it in their house. We call them and we say, hey, do you know how to use everything, blah, blah, blah. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, have you washed your eyelids in the last 24 hours? No. So the problem is where the eyelid wash is. It's in my car, it's on my kitchen table. You wash your eyelids if you're a man in the shower. If you're a woman, it's a little more confusing because you might be taking off makeup. You might also do it in the shower, but we have to ask, where is it? Where do you do this thing? Once you know that, the coaching is super easy. Oh, great. You're going to take off your makeup every day after work with this face wash, da-da-da-da. What we want you to do after that face wash is use this on your eyelids so it kills the mites and you express the glance. As soon as you do that, compliance jumps. So our compliance rate compared to doctors' offices, 13 times better. 13 times, not 13%. It's not hard what we do, it's just weird. None of you came in thinking, oh, you know what we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about how to get people to wash their face right. But that is fundamentally how we grow. Now, who should do that? Everyone. So, we like to compare ourselves to the oral hygiene market. The oral hygiene market in the United States is a $59 billion market. The ocular hygiene market in the United States is less than $1 billion. Whether we win or not, all y'all are going to be doing this because your eyes are going to hurt. It's going to be a $40 billion market in 15 years, and there's nobody there but us. That's why we do it.
That was great, Tom. Man. So, your wife, Cheryl, I might even suggest maybe she's the brains of the operation.
For sure.
Knowing a little bit about it, Tom and I have always connected because his wife's an optometrist, and my grandpa, my father, and my sister are optometrists, so kind of understand that a little bit. That being said, what surprised you the most with, Cheryl having a real deep understanding of the space as an optometrist and really understanding dry eyes as a problem? Going into this, obviously you guys felt that you really had something there, and I think it's pretty clear that when not blinking enough causes dry eyes, and what causes not blinking enough, well, like being in front of screens a lot, it's pretty clear that from a trend perspective, that's like an acute problem. What's most surprised you about the kind of challenges with going to market with it that you just didn't foresee, and maybe Cheryl didn't foresee either, even being very close to like the patients and the problem?
To answer that question, I probably got to put some context around the eye space. The eye industry is part of healthcare, so I'll just say that. But optometry offices are weird because you have a medical practice attached to a retail business. So they sell you glasses. So glasses are essentially a retail purchase. The lenses are the medical purchase. But you're going in and saying, oh, I like, turtle, and I want a little round frame, and oh, can I get 2 pairs because I have different clothes that I wear? I was most surprised that the doctors really don't understand that business at all. Not surprised in the sense that they have no experience or no understanding. It's that when you go in and you talk about what I would call common business concepts, Main Street business concepts, what the doctor cares about is making sure you see well. What the doctor cares about is your eye health. They make money when they sell you glasses, but they kind of never really think about how to maximize that money. So when we go in and we say, and we just literally ran, one of the things that I would say I'm getting smarter about is how to use AI to build sort of mock-ups. So we just ran this thing. My wife's practice will increase her revenue by $290,000 by working with Peeq. She doesn't spend $290,000. It's because she does a better job of getting compliance. Those people are more likely to come in and spend a little bit more money on services. They're more likely to reappoint, a bunch of these things. So that should be something that doctors get excited about, and they don't have a context. They'll fight us over 40 cents for one eye drop. And they'll be like, I can get this somewhere cheaper, because they don't see the rest of the value chain that goes with the services that we provide. That to me is really surprising. It's surprising to me when rational math is difficult to convey to your customer, where you're like, this is what we're doing, this is how the math works. And the customer sort of is like, yeah, but the only thing I'm looking at is this. Because you got super smart people, wicked good doctors, who are like, I don't know, I make $1 more. It's like, no, you don't. Yeah, you make $1 more on this. You make $700,000 over here.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the big problems, or challenges with when you're selling into healthcare, and really when you're selling into a space where your customer is sort of a channel. I know my experience with building products that you sell to marketing agencies. I was just on a call with some guys that might still be here. I can't remember. Earlier today, talking about selling into the agency channel, where they sell hours, essentially. Marketing agencies sell companies hours, and when you go present them with a product that saves them time, fewer hours, they're like, wait, what is this? This is way too efficient. We sell hours, we want more hours. And I do think in healthcare, you kind of run into a little bit of that, where there's some kind of business model kind of incongruency when you talk about scaling these businesses and selling new products in.
So one of the things that's difficult about that question is it's not just the industry, it's that as we're building a scalable business, we're raising capital, and the people on the outside expect the business industry to work a certain way, and you're like, it doesn't really work like that. So we get a lot of people that say, well, do you want dry eye to be covered under insurance? And it's like, well, it doesn't really affect us one way or the other, because toothbrush and toothpaste, while you can get it paid for with an HSA, isn't really covered by insurance. We sit basically at that stage of hygiene. Right? So we're not really affected. Where it does affect is the eye industry is so weird around how they handle insurance, because you have vision insurance, which is really just screening insurance. It says, oh, you have a problem, you actually have to bill that medically. Oh, you just want a new pair of glasses? Great, we're going to give you a discount on a new pair of glasses. It doesn't actually do anything for your vision. Any vision problem ends up on your medical insurance. And so when we go and talk to healthcare experts, they don't understand really that the eye industry is so weird, like it's just an anomaly. So, I mean, to your point, I don't think from the outside looking in, it's an easy industry to just jump in and go, oh, because it's the same problem. It's, I make money when I see customers and do a comprehensive exam. I make money when I do, all these sorts of things that are pretty easy, but then when you go and say, oh, but the write down because of that insurance means I made, the average comprehensive exam in the United States is $434. An optometrist makes $28. That's their profit, 5.6%. It's a terrible business if that's your job. That's why they sell glasses, because they make more money on the glasses side, profit-wise. But it's like, that is counterintuitive to other people in healthcare, because that's not how healthcare makes money.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's talk about raising capital. So when, and this is always one of those things that in healthcare especially, even if it's something that's adjacent to healthcare, when you're talking to investors, and I'm asking, I am an investor, so I kind of know the answer to this, but I think this is a useful conversation for other folks. Have you found that it's better for you to identify and position yourself as a company in the healthcare space, or is it a company in the consumer packaged goods space because there's an element of that? Or, obviously we know everybody loves software, but how are you thinking about positioning? But also, what's been sort of the evolution of how you've thought about positioning the business relative to raising capital?
Super good question. So a couple things about raising capital. So when you raise capital in Omaha, it's a little bit different than if you're raising capital on the coast. They care about different things.
You don't say.
So in Omaha, I consistently get feedback from investors that say, wow, your financials are really aggressive. Do you think you can do this? So you're taught to basically have a hockey stick that goes up and to the right. Hopefully that hockey stick is based in reality, that you're not just like, well, I've seen enough decks to know sometimes they really aren't. But I've had multiple of investors who've invested in Peeq say, you know, don't get out in front of your ski tips there. Do you really think you can do this? That's really tricky because you want to tell the same story to everybody that's going to put money into your company. You don't want to say, oh, no, we're going to create a dividend platform and you're going to make 12%, blah, 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 to one set of customers, and then go, no, we're going to exit and you're going to make $100 million by us doing this and that. So positioning is really hard because you're building a deck with the idea that you could be providing it to either of them. And the point is not, oh, I can't change. They might share the deck back and forth. So you can't have a different deck. So John's question is a good one because right now, the best thing for us to do is to say, Peeq is really Peeq AI. If we just said we're an AI tool, people would get excited to talk to us. There's AI embedded in what we do, but we are not an AI tool. When we show a picture of that consumer product good, because we made it. It's hard to make something. It's made in the United States. Like, I can't name another company here that has built a consumer product because it's really hard. Well, as soon as that picture is there, investors will say, oh, so you make products. It's like, we do make products, but that's not how we scale and make money. That's how we get paid. But the way we make money is by getting all y'all to wash your eyelids. And then they say, oh, but that's a habit formation. Oh, that's a software. Oh, that's a workflow. So the way we are currently positioned is we are building the ocular hygiene industry to dominate it. We're building the whole thing. And there aren't a lot of players anywhere else. So there's people that might have an e-commerce site, there's somebody that might have a product, but there's not anybody that thinks about it the way we think about it. Meaning, there isn't anybody who's writing software for compliance. They're writing software as an EHR. They don't want to talk to the patient. They, in fact, can't talk to the patient about their consumer habits. So when we're thinking about this, we're trying to build something that's going to be a big company, not something that sells a little bit more to one office. It's a hard position here because people are like, oh, can't you just go get 10 more offices and cash flow? And it's like, yeah, we can. Like, we could cash flow tomorrow, but then we're stuck like that forever. We don't want to be that. We really believe you should wash your eyelids. You should peek your eyelids. You really should peek your eyelids. I'm not saying that to make money. I don't care if you buy our stuff. Your eyes are going to hurt so bad in 10 years if you don't. You may be lucky and have brilliant teeth that never have to be brushed. You may be lucky your eyelids won't fail, but if they do, you're going to wish they didn't. You're going to lose your friends. You're not going to be able to go outside. It's going to suck bad. And my point of that is, when we talk to investors on the coast, they're like, that is what we want to hear. In fact, so we went through Techstars. There's an investor from True. His name's Clarence Bethia. Clarence, I was kind of in the Omaha mindset. I'm like, oh, here's what we're doing. He said, Tom, stop being a pussy. You're building an industry. Tell people. And it's like, that's the feedback we get elsewhere. Here, people are like, how many offices do you have? Oh, can you do 2 more, 5 more? It's like, that's really tricky as a founder, particularly when there aren't other founders that are building similar businesses. Because you can't go, oh, who's actually giving you the insight and the feedback that you need to have sort of that positive loop of like, oh yeah, we're doing the right thing. So, like, I would say this even if John wasn't here. Charlie and John take my phone calls and say, keep going. Most investors don't. That matters to me. I can't say it matters to everyone. It matters to me.
So this is actually like a really, outside of what you just said, appreciate that. Like, that's not very kind. This is actually a place where Tom and I, going back so long, is kind of serendipitous to the conversation. At Ops Compass, where I'm co-founder and CTO still, when we were raising our seed round, Tom Chapman called us up one day and said, hey, Kleiner Perkins is coming into town. Do you guys want to pitch to Kleiner Perkins? And we said, well, yeah, of course. And we went to Kleiner Perkins and we met with them and we gave them our pitch, and we were talking about our TAM, and we're talking cloud security. This is like 2017, 2018. They just stopped us and said, your guys' total addressable market, you need to add a 0. And did we look like kind of Nebraska bumpkins a little bit? Yeah. Did we know 100% that the TAM needed a zero? Absolutely we did. But because we've done a lot of fundraising here in Nebraska, but also in the Midwest, we know that like that doesn't necessarily play. We got to like tone it back. And after that point, I know you said you can't have 2 slide decks or 2 pitch decks. Well, we had 2 pitch decks. We had investors who were kind of outside the Midwest, like coastal investors. We had that pitch deck, which was very aggressive. And we had our more kind of subdued kind of Midwest, like Nebraska deck, where we had to talk about like how quickly we could get to profitability and stuff like that. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
See, I thought that the interesting things that would maybe poke their head up, since Tom and I have known each other for a while, is talking, we might end up accidentally talking about like the Charlotte Hornets or something here. Tom's an NBA guy, I'm a big NBA guy. This whole thing has been at danger all night of turning into us talking about NBA in front of a crowd. But
that's not a joke. I have watched about 8 Charlotte Hornet games in the last week from last year. I'm just trying to look at their defensive rotations. So it's a real thing. Got to check out the defensive rotations.
So let's step back a bit, because I think like again, as a founder, I think you had a pretty unique experience going in. I mean, your co-founder Cheryl being a professional in the space and having that domain expertise, I think we can all kind of understand somebody who's an optometrist and has that kind of career path stepping into entrepreneurship. But I think it's like a really interesting story how you got there as well. And I'm kind of interested in where it really started, because I know you were down in Houston and you were working, Tom knows. Tom, let's talk about Enron.
I'll just walk you through kind of the genesis of how I got into entrepreneurship. And it starts, so I was an English major. So I taught business classes, which is funny, but I was an English major, English and history. And surprisingly, when I graduated, nobody really needed me to like diagram poetry. So they were like, why don't you actually get a real job? So I worked.
I was going to ask you about Candide tonight, because I know you love Candide.
I do.
We'll save that for another. We'll save that for another interview.
So I worked for a couple years here. My wife was going to optometry school in Houston. So I went and I really wanted to be a teacher. That was actually what I wanted to do. I wanted to teach and coach basketball. I applied to the Houston Independent School District, and if you drove through Houston at the time, there were signs everywhere that said, we need teachers, you know, all these sorts of things. And they were like, sorry, you can't teach here because you haven't taken Texas history. And I was like, what? And they were like, well, every teacher who teaches history in the public schools has to have a class on Texas.
Not U.S. history, but Texas history.
Literally Texas. So I was like, well, I don't know how I could possibly have done that, because I didn't live, I mean, it's not offered. So they're like, well, we can maybe get you like this appointment where you don't really get paid for a year, but like, and I was like, okay, well, that's not great. And it happened that the guy who ran the analyst and associate program had played basketball at Creighton. My dad played baseball at Creighton. He was like, well, I'll call Paul and I'll just see what he says. So Paul was like, well, you know, you're an English major. I don't think you're going to get this job, but you can come talk to people about this. So you go into this interview process. And I remember in the second interview at Enron, they said, what was your SAT score in math? And I was like 800. And they were like, oh, you were an English major? I'm like, yeah, I suck at English, but I was really good at math. And they were like, oh, you can work here. So within that, I got this job at Enron. So I worked, and they were kind of like, well, you've had these weird jobs where you worked at a bookstore and you did auditing for a bank and you did these random things. So we're going to put you in regulatory. So I went and worked as a lobbyist in 13 states. So when I started, my job was basically to say how much we were losing money in India. And like, I kid you not, within a week of me starting, 4 people quit to go to different parts of the business. And they're like, you're now in charge of, you're our head lobbyist in North Carolina. And I was like, I'm 24. I don't know anything about North Carolina. I've never been there. So for a year and a half, I got my brain beaten in traveling to 10 communities in like 6 days. It was every day you're on a plane going somewhere. And some of those were like, you're dropping off a check, you're going to the next one, you're dropping off a check. There's a little bit of that when it comes to lobbying. But a lot of my job was to explain how retail deregulation was good for a place that definitely didn't want retail deregulation. So you'd go in and you talk, and essentially it would be a room like this, and the utility got, I'll say there's 40 of you in here, got 38 of you to boo. But 2 of you would grab me when I walked out, and you would offer Enron a $5 million deal to take something off the utility's plate. So my job was just to go out and find people. So I did that for a little bit, and I'm not going to go into the stuff that would get me into trouble, but there were some definitely illegal things, and people I worked with definitely did go to jail in the regulatory structure.
Wait, at Enron?
Yeah, that happened on the regulatory side. I'm not saying they fixed an auction in New Jersey. I'm just saying you can probably find it in some books. I did happen to be in the room when that happened, and I did take a call that didn't exist to leave. The second piece of that is I went down to the trading desk. So as I was working in these markets, what was discovered was essentially that in the 13 or 14 markets I worked in a lot were the 4 different wholesale electricity markets in the world. There were 4 models in the world. It just happened in the markets I worked. So I moved down to the trading desk. And so on the trading desk, I am coming back to entrepreneurship. I'm just long-winded. So I moved down to the trading desk. So if you have ever seen the movie Smartest Guys in the Room, they have pictures all the time of the trading desk, all this sort of stuff. I can confirm that some of the dramatizations are a little extreme and probably not true, but some of them are kind of true. So in one of the dramatizations, Jeff Skilling gets on a table and he says, "Fuck California." I was standing about 6 feet from him when he said that. I was not important. I just happened to, he was right there. I was standing there. I'd walked in late and he was right. He stood on a table. Jeff Skilling was very short. So like he had to stand up so people could see him. He still is, by the way. He's still alive. I assume. Actually, I don't know. He could have grown.
I think, yeah, well, I was gonna say, I don't know if he's grown. I think he's still alive though.
He is definitely alive. Different story. We'll just put that over there. But if you work at the 6th largest business in the world and it falls apart in a month, you start to not really trust institutions a whole lot. So I would say I had a lot of skepticism just because there was stuff you'd be like, well, that doesn't make sense. And all these smart people are saying, no, you're just dumb. You're stupid. You're from Nebraska. I'm just like, I don't know. Like, it seems like the math says we lost $8 billion, not made $2 billion, but okay. I guess I don't totally understand the math. English major. So I went through this and I sort of learned a lot because we went bankrupt. And when we went bankrupt, I stayed there and I got essentially promoted because there was nobody left. So I priced the entire electricity book for North America for about 6 months. So that was an absolute value of about $20 billion, which is a lot of money today. It was a lot more 25 years ago. And so it was just me. So I was going in and like that involved people throwing things through doors because I was giving them bad news. There's a whole litany of stuff that I can talk about, but I'm not going to. But the point is like, you start to realize you're not totally incompetent when you have a lot of responsibility. And in that, it gives you a lot of confidence to go out and do some other things. So I remember I came home for Christmas, it was probably Easter because it was in the spring. And I was driving with my mom and I said, "Mom, I kind of think I want to start a business." And she looked at me, she said, "Tom, what do you know? You can't start a business." And I remember distinctly being like, "No, I'm not that dumb." She was like, "You should work a little bit longer, blah, blah, blah." But I, for a long time was like, I think I know stuff that other people don't know, and there has to be a way for me to do this in a way that isn't sort of currently available to me. So when I went to law school, I knew I wasn't going to be a lawyer. So there's like a key personal thing in here that I'm just going to insert that is super important.
You always showed so much promise to law school, but being like, I'm not going to be a lawyer.
So when I got married in the year 2000. I was diagnosed with primary sclerosing cholangitis 3 months after I got married. My actuarial life at that point was 6 years. So I was supposed to be dead at 30. Okay, so I'm not. I'm 49. I'm really old. I don't have any symptoms. I'm fine. But it's important to the story because the reason I went to law school and business school was because we thought I was going to die and I had to retool. In Nebraska, we bought an eye clinic and we, honest to God, thought I was going to be dead. So it was like, okay, well, it kind of doesn't really matter. But none of the jobs I could possibly do based on my background were here. So it was like, we're moving here because we had kids, and it was like we needed to be next to my parents, near my wife's parents, etc. So like it's an important part because it's sort of like, without it, you're like, well, why did you end up here? We moved here because we thought I was going to die. So that's the whole story. It doesn't make sense contextually 20 years later to see me on stage, but that's what happened. So I went to law school and business school, and during that time, I knew I wasn't going to be a lawyer. I knew before I went, but it was the only thing I could do from where I was to get to where I wanted to be, which was, I wanted to be in a position where I could do real things. I had 5 years. I was like, I got to do something now to fix some of these problems I see in the world for my kids, et cetera. And it was the only thing I could do because limited. So I went to work for the Omaha Chamber of Commerce. And at the Omaha Chamber of Commerce, my job was essentially to recruit insurance companies. If you don't know anything about the history of insurance in Nebraska, At about that time, we redomesticated 7 really big insurance companies. It was based on a really simple math formula that I helped build. Tim Wagner, who was the director of insurance, was a rock star. There was a lot of stuff going right, but Pacific Life, Aflac, all these sorts. One of them was a company called Arch. And I remember at the ribbon cutting, I was standing next to David Brown, and I was like, David, why do we do this? These are 40 jobs that are basically call center jobs that
Former CEO of the Omaha Chamber.
And he's like, well, jobs are jobs. And I was like, I don't think that's right. So I started with this sort of belief system that said, I'm going to question that specific thing, and I'm going to kind of dig into it. And what I discovered was, the key to economic development is wealth creation, but we didn't have a way to measure wealth, so we measured jobs. And I was like, well, we don't care about jobs. We actually want to be richer as a community. So we should be really focused. So I started going, well, how is wealth created? Wealth is actually created when we start businesses and grow them. It imports the wealth here that gets spread around to beer, bars and breweries and coffee shops. We need businesses like Workshop to make money to pay for a bunch of other stuff that allows us, it basically funnels down into the economy. So there's a lot of economics there that I'm not going to go into. But I kind of had this approach that was like, oh, this is interesting. And we were doing so well in insurance that my bosses were sort of like, we don't really know what you do, but just if you can do that, you can do whatever you want the rest of the time. And like, I didn't have to do much. It was an Excel spreadsheet. I just typed in numbers and like, here's the number for Pacific Life, $69 million if they redomesticate. They'd go out and do it, and they'd redomesticate. And so it took 10 minutes. So I started talking to entrepreneurs, and I'd just go to coffee. So this is when John and I met. I had coffee with him, and I was just like, tell me about your business. What do you need? And he was like, well, I need this. And every entrepreneur says the same thing. I need money. Literally not every. It's probably
always ask for money.
9 out of 10. But the next question is the important question. What are you going to do with it? And that was the beginning of ecosystem building in Omaha. Not me, there were 40 of us asking that same question. And if you look around Omaha today, you can see literally the roots of ecosystem building in the world here. So like in this room, there are 2 nationally eminent ecosystem builders sitting in the audience. Not Omaha eminent, nationally. If you walk into any ecosystem conversation and you say some of the names from here, people will be like, oh yeah, that guy's a rock star. So like in that world, my joke that I tell on stage, because I speak a lot. In fact, I rarely do firesides because I talk so much. My joke is, I'm one of the top 10 people in the world for measuring entrepreneurial ecosystems, because there's only 3 of us. And that's actually true. There aren't very many people that do that specific thing, which is why nationally and internationally I'm known for it. But like here, everybody's like, well, what do you know? So like I have a conversation, where I'll post something on LinkedIn and people will be like, well, you're an idiot, that's wrong. I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure I know what I'm talking about, actually. And the point of that is, we don't understand what we've been blessed with here in terms of the expertise, not just in ecosystem building, but across entrepreneurship. And we definitely don't tell those stories well enough. So my entry into entrepreneurship was more of an accident. Like I had on a bell curve, I was probably predisposed to be a starter of something in a builder. But like it really was, I think that thought process is incorrect. I'm going to go into it. And as I did that, now I've helped invest about $25 million. I've built 4 or 5 businesses that have exited. I've worked with probably 1,000 founders. Like I've done a lot of stuff now that wasn't really what I thought I was going to be doing. I thought, honestly, I was going to be dead. So like put that over to the side. But then the second piece of that is, it was honest inquiry along the way that led to like, oh, well, we can do this better. This sucks. We got to do this better.
Well, like, I think that you and I actually got introduced to each other by Dusty Davidson.
Yeah.
I think that was it. You started Cornstalks, didn't you?
Yes.
So, Tom, by that time, they gave you like a title of Director of Entrepreneurship. Were you like the first one?
In the country.
Yeah, like there was like, so the Omaha Chamber, there was already kind of like a cool kind of, I won't call it an ecosystem, I'll call it like a scene happening here. Andy probably remembers a little bit of, and what I remember thinking was cool, because I spoke at Cornstalks, which was kind of just like a speaker series, a little bit similar to this. Tom would bring in somebody who is an entrepreneur who is building or built something, very similar to like Million Cups a little bit, but it was in the evening and there was booze. But to me, what was interesting about it was there was like a lot going on that was kind of like grassroots, and it felt like it was cool, but like nobody like important, knew about it. And that was to me like the first thing where it's like, man, there's this guy at like the Omaha Chamber that's like kind of connecting what's happening on a grassroots basis with startups to like the broader community. Was that like an intentional thing, or did you just, I mean, were you, it ended up, I think it was probably like a little bit intentional, but I mean, were you thinking that far ahead where you're like, there needs to be something that connects this stuff that's happening to like kind of the more corporate established ecosystem that we had in business here?
So I'm going to answer that in 3 ways. First, Cornstalk was created to avoid people that were trying to sell financial products and insurance, because every event that had founders in the room, the founders would leave within 10 minutes. So we intentionally said we're going to exclude a lot of the people that are trying to get founders to buy their products. And so it was a private, you had to basically be invited. Now, that didn't mean you were like a great founder. I remember there were these 3 kids that were like coding games in their basement that came, and they were just like, what is this place? Free beer? This is amazing. And it was just like, yeah, they're doing stuff.
There were free beers.
And so it was like, the intent was not to be exclusionary to the founder. The intent was to protect the founder from the people that were trying to get them to spend money on stuff they didn't need. So that was part 1. Part 2 was, when we went out and actually interviewed founders and just said, hey, tell me a little bit about what you need, consistently would be like, I really need Union Pacific as a customer. We'd be like, okay, well, if Union Pacific was your customer, what would happen? We'd be like, it would break everything. I actually couldn't exist if Union Pacific was my customer, so that's probably a bad idea. And I'm like, agreed, so let's not introduce you yet. What can we do to get you ready to get you there? Who's the first customer? They'd be like, well, there's this little trucking company that has 5 trucks. Maybe I start there. It's like, okay, well, let's do that. The chamber had, at the time, all of them as members. So I could call anyone and just be like, hey, this is Tom from the chamber. I got this startup here that wants to talk to you. Do you have 20 minutes to like get a cup of coffee? And they'd be like, sure. So what we would do is those introductions. Well, the way I met the founders was founders invited founders, and then I would have an opportunity to go get coffee, and then I could start plugging them into other stuff. Now, it didn't always work, and I wasn't always great. I don't want to, this sounds like, oh, you were so great. I was terrible. And then the third process on why Cornstalks was the way it was my budget when it started was $20, because that was what I could afford to provide. So it was milk and cookies, and then I had $40 because I made a little bit more money, and so then I would buy beer and cookies. And like, nobody ever sponsored Cornstalks. I paid for a lot of the stuff. Now, I got reimbursed a little bit, but for the most part, it was just Tom's budget. And if you look at successful programs like that around the country, almost all of them start sort of like that. Like Scale Omaha sort of started like that. Like a lot of the programs start where somebody's just like, this needs to be in the world because it solves a problem. And yeah, I mean, that was the genesis, but like what people remember about that time is rarely anything I did. And I'm using the first person intentionally there. And that's important because sometimes in communities, people want it to be about them. And I would say in most good communities, you recognize there are lots of mothers and fathers who built stuff that were essential, that one individual could not have done that. And so like Cornstalks wasn't isolated. There were 16 different things happening that were contributing to me finding John saying, oh, this is cool, having 20 startups. I mean, so a lot of the companies that you see today, like Workshop, is derived from stuff that I first knew about because of Cornstalks. Like a lot of those companies, like I worked with Huddle. Like Huddle, I think, was our 3rd speaker. They had 0 customers when they came to speak. 0.
I met those guys, I think, at Cornstalk. I think I was at that one.
And like when I say, like I did nothing for Huddle, but other people in that room did.
Yeah, it started connectivity. Like, you know, Jeff and Dusty were doing stuff, and I think Cornstalks was at the chamber for a while, but remember it was at Megan Hunt's camp co-working?
It's moved all over.
Yeah, it was like, so there was like the first like co-working space here. What you did at the chamber and kind of like that event in particular, it started to like connect disparate things together in the community that I think we have a lot more of that now than we did then.
For sure.
So fast forwarding just a little bit to your time kind of in venture private equity. We don't need to get too into like what Nebraska Global was,
yeah.
But the thing that I think would be interesting to talk about is kind of your experience transitioning from that to something that was really more about venture capital and building and funding new startups. And I think it'd be really interesting to talk about how the funding environment today is different than it was when you first got with Nebraska Global, because Nebraska Global was the first big kind of venture thing that had happened here that maybe wasn't like Treetop Ventures with like Bill Fisher and some of the early days stuff.
Yeah. So again, I have 6 children. So what happened was I could no longer afford to work at the chamber. I needed to make more money. And I was trying to figure out how I could actually be part of things that were starting. Like, I didn't want to be a supporter. I wanted to actually build companies. So Nebraska Global was what would be called today a design studio. So like, companies would come in, we'd help build the software. I was the business person. So my job was to help them get to product market fit and to get to $1 million in revenue.
But maybe with much more generous cash commitments.
Yes, much more money. I mean, so I never really actually had a title, but like the closest thing is like CEO or like chief business reader, maybe chief revenue officer of Beehive. Beehive recently sold to Civic Plus. And in that job, when I walked in the door, there were $3,000 of revenue. When I left, there was something like 1.3 million. That took about 3 or 4 years. We raised a couple $1 million worth of capital. We were valued at about $14-15 million. That was what I did at Nebraska Global. I did that. But the other thing I did was I was on our investment committee. And when I say there were, like to reiterate what John said, so most of you are part of the startup ecosystem, so my assumption is you know what prototype grants are and like they help. Prototype grants didn't exist when we started. So like we helped build prototype grants because we were like, oh, all these companies are walking in and they don't have anything. So did you testify for them? I know Dusty did. I testified for some other stuff in the BIA.
I try and stay out of court, Tom.
So when the BIA was written in 2011, I was on my way out of the chamber headed to Nebraska Global, but it was like all of these structures that we, not necessarily take for granted, but are critically important that make things work, were things that sort of were occurring at that time. And Nebraska Global was a part of that. It was just part of the process, which is in Lincoln, Huddle was now succeeding, and some of the investors who had invested in Huddle were like, hey, we should try to figure out how to do this. And Steve Keen kind of jumped in and was like, hey, I'll organize this and I can really build stuff. So that was the logic behind Nebraska Global. At the time, Nebraska was 49.
And he was an entrepreneur like force here. Yep. Everybody who was building stuff here really looked up to him. He had sold something to Microsoft. He had made a bunch of money.
Sold something to Apple, sold something to DigitalOcean. He had 3 or 4 exits. They weren't like $100 million exits. They were, I'm selling a product, but they were all very impressive. He runs ocular today, he's great. Within that, he got the trust of sort of Lincoln. I would say in many ways Lincoln is ahead of Omaha in terms of being willing to sort of jump in with 2 feet. I think that's really Nelnet's leadership. I want to make sure I say that explicitly about ecosystem stuff.
You need to put that on LinkedIn, Tom.
I like Lincoln, I like Omaha, I'm for everywhere. I think Lincoln has been a little bit more aggressive about caring about this stuff, but different issue. Within that, when we started talking about capital, it was an environment where, when I say people walked in and had no idea what they're doing, I remember a pitch from a student that walked in and said, well, I need $1 million and you get 1% of my company. And we were just like, so you're worth 100 million? No, I'm worth $1 million. It's like, I'm sorry, we're trying to do the math here. And it was things of that nature where it was like, we saw pitches where we almost had to, like, I ended up having to go across the street, the mill was diagonal from us, and sit down with entrepreneurs to say, okay, let's just walk through your numbers, because like what you sent is ridiculous. Not I dislike it, not it's wrong, it's just like, it doesn't actually make sense. Like A and B don't equal Q. It's like, it's just made up stuff. So we got to figure out how to turn that into real information. You just tell it to me, we'll kind of walk through the math, etc. We had to walk through how term sheets worked. We had to do, and there was a bunch of stuff that it was just, there was nobody that knew how to do any of it. So today there's 6 or 7 law firms that know how to do it. There's 15 different people who have organized capital. Like all that stuff is so different. So now, like, you would laugh at some of the conversations we had, but like I remember a conversation with the social assurance guys where there was a guy who offered them a 7 times liquidity preference, and they were like, I'm not going to quote them, but essentially it was like, F off, asshole. You know, like, that was not possible in 2011. It was possible by 2014. And it wasn't, again, it wasn't Nebraska Global, it's that we matured a lot just by having more activity, because you just figure stuff out with experience. And like that was very much what I was looking for in Nebraska Global. I was like, I want to get in there and actually do stuff. Because while I like building ecosystems, I love building companies.
Yeah, and I think that, like, man, Nebraskans have such a long memory, and, you know, Nebraska Global didn't quite work out, I think, the way that everybody maybe thought, but what I would offer is that those sorts of things, might kind of maybe to some of the LPs or kind of facially be like a big maybe failure. I think that when you think about the ecosystem broadly, to your point, how many people, like I just remember at the time there was like a zeitgeist because it was like they raised a bunch of money, we had huddle going on, we were coming off of like some really good like big Omahas where there was some really big names here and you had some things going on. And I think that that's maybe like one of the testament to like you're from an ecosystem perspective, even your losses are probably like net gains for everybody else when it's people learn and the investors learn and there's just kind of these waves of activity. I mean, would you agree that I guess I've always contended, I mean, even Charlie and I like on the trail, raising money for Move, it's crazy to me that there are still sort of echoes of Nebraska Global, but I actually really believe that it was probably a net positive for like ecosystem wise, again, not for their own balance sheet because of the things you just said. Do you think that that's right?
Yeah.
Or am I trying to revive everybody?
No, I mean, I think, so I have a whole mental map about ecosystems, right? I could spend, literally I get hired to stand on stage for 4 hours and talk about it. I'm not gonna do that. The most important thing is the entrepreneur, full stop. If a community does a good job of identifying their entrepreneurs, they're gonna win. What Nebraska Global did was they created a mechanism for those entrepreneurs to come out of the woodwork because there was a reason to go. So suddenly a bunch of people who we wouldn't know who they were, suddenly we're like, oh yeah, here's a path, even if I didn't get money from them, et cetera, here's a path that now is present, so I recognize it as a thing I could do. And again, this goes all the way back to what we were talking about earlier. Nebraska Global was trying to build big businesses.
Yeah, it was audacious. It was an audacious project.
And having the courage to sort of stand up and say, we're building $1 billion business was not a thing people could do in 2005. They could say it in the back room, but they couldn't say it in the front room. So today, like, again, this is not, I hope nobody thinks I'm taking credit for this stuff, but like Luke Hansen and Company Cam is possible because all of the investors, all of the people who are involved, et cetera, now believe it's possible, allowing him to have a huge audacious vision. That doesn't mean it's easy, it's fucking hard. It's just, now it's possible because you have supporters, you have pillars in the community that are giving you the support you need to be able to do those things in a way that just like wasn't there 20 years ago. There just wasn't, and it wasn't that people would say, oh, we were actively against that. It was like you couldn't find them. So if you can't find them, they're essentially not there. So like the value of the ecosystem is when founders start working together and identifying, you can kind of go, oh, there's this side tunnel that you can get through much faster. And so you can go over here. Oh, here's an investor who's great. Oh, don't go over there. That guy harasses the shit out of people. And that stuff makes it so much easier because you not just like have the cheat sheet, but you also have people that are sort of like, hey, I believe in you. You can do this.
Yeah. So you, and we talked a little bit about how you've done a lot of like consulting and around startup ecosystems and these sorts of things. The other thing I would say is, as somebody who's gotten multiple prototype grants and stuff with Tom Chapman's help, I think there was a period where you personally accounted for an obscenely large sort of percentage of the prototype grants. You were the guy that helped people get prototype grants. And you don't need to like, yes or no, like I will just say Tom, like I didn't know anybody who got a prototype grant that wasn't working with Tom, but that kind of experience, so transitioning from Nebraska Global, doing consulting, being involved in ecosystems outside Nebraska, kind of digging into the metrics, being involved in all these prototype grants, what'd you learn about building startups that, because you're building one now, like so you've had this big journey where you've done a lot of stuff before you started Peeq Pro. What did you learn from all those prototype grants, all the ecosystem work that's helping you as like a founder?
That's a really hard question.
You thought I was just going to ask him about the Hornets.
So I'll say three things. So I was in Boulder the last couple days at something called TechStars FounderCon. And one of the things that I said repeatedly that was very different about Omaha than other places that I have heard other people say about Omaha is, whether it's ecosystem builders or founders or whatever, we don't really compete with each other. Like we tend to lift each other up in a way that's not true. in a lot of communities. And I say that sincerely. But what I would say I learned the most is I learned the power of friendship. I learned how important it was to have a community around you so that when you had questions, because like if you're a founder that knows all the answers, you're a bad founder. Like good founders know they don't know half the stuff they're supposed to know, and then you can go to AI and learn maybe half of that. Well, other founders know a lot of the stuff, and you just got to be comfortable going like, yeah, I'm a dumbass. I don't know what this means. And that is one of the things I learned going through that process, that I'm working with people who are wicked smart, way smarter than me, that had no idea how to fill out a one-page application. They were like, should I write like 60 books? Like, what do I do? And it's like, hey, just say, here's who our customers, this is how much money we're gonna make, you know, all the things you just told me, we're just gonna write into 5 sentences. And then they'd be like, wow, that was amazing. It's like, now the most important thing you can do is go tell that to the person who's gonna write the grant. Don't just send in an application, just go talk to them, because this place isn't very big. When they know who you are, the likelihood of them saying yes is way higher, because they see you're legit, you're a person that cares, that this matters to, that this is not just sort of a pathway for money, it's a way for you to bring your vision into the world. So knowing you don't know very much is one. The second thing I would say, and this is specific to Peeq, is I don't know a single business that filled out the prototype grant that they often built what they thought that was right. It was always like, oops, yeah, we got to do this. This other thing is more important. This thing over here is it. So like I told you about Peeq, I mean, we thought we were a product company. If you had asked me the first time we raised money, I'm like, oh yeah, we're a product company. But what we discovered was the product didn't really matter. We had to get people to use it. And to get people to use it, it was a lot about changing a behavior rather than getting them to buy that. Like that's not super expensive. By the way, you should all go to our website and buy face wash. I have to say that. But the point,
I'm a customer.
But we thought we were something different, and we still probably are a little bit wrong, but it's sort of like you get closer to where you are as you go down the list. And like at some point you sort of become fully formed, but you're not fully formed in the startup and scale up stage. And that becomes really apparent if you get lots of at-bats with founders. You realize, oh, it's okay, you don't know what you're doing. Like we just have to know a little bit more tomorrow. We have to know a little bit more about our customer. And the biggest challenge I would say is you really see the importance of having balance on your teams, that you have somebody that's thinking about the customer and the product, not just somebody who's thinking about the customer, not just somebody who is coding, you need both, because otherwise you build the wrong thing. Otherwise, you think it's easy to build a thing when it's not. And I know a ton of stupid entrepreneurs. Like really dumb people.
Same.
But they are so positive and they just keep going. So I would say being smart is actually a negative because you see other options, etc. So again, if you said, what's one of the things that I think you learn from your losses is you learn resilience. You know, I have a lot of children. My children are pretty talented. You can't solve their problems for them. You can solve some, you can help prevent some, but at the end of the day, they're gonna mess up and you gotta let them. It's the same thing with startups. You can't get it right. You can't. Even if you wanted to, you can't get it right. But then when you don't get it right, you can't stop. And you know, I'll be honest, I've had a shitty week, and in the shitty week is how you go, yeah, this matters. I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna do this, etc. And you know, I would like to say that I have great words of wisdom. The wisdom is just get up in the morning and keep going. You know, we're raising money. We got a lot of no's this week. You know what you do next? You ask more people.
That's exactly it. So we're just about wrapping up here. I was going to ask you about what being a great high school catcher at Creighton Prep brought to your entrepreneurial career, but let's close it out. What's next for Peeq Pro? What's the vision? Where are you going? And again, we'll wrap up with this. So before you're done, thank you for coming, man.
You're welcome. Really, what would be great is if you bought product. You know, so I am an entrepreneur. We win when people buy stuff. So like, I know it seems stupid. It's $25 to buy cleanser. And like, that's what actually matters. From a functional, like, how do you help? If you said, what are we gonna do? We're building the ocular hygiene industry. That is what we're doing. The next step is to figure out how we can do a little bit better at getting all of you to wash your eyelids. More important, it's how do we get people who wear false eyelashes? How do we get people who are dance teams? And how do we get menopausal and perimenopausal women help with the thing that really hurts. It's hard to take off false eyelashes. If you don't want to take them off, you got to use the right products. And that group of women who are going through menopause are devastated by dry eye, and nobody talks about it. So we're really focused on those groups and how we get doctors to do a better job with them, and how we do a better job with them, and how we talk about it more freely, and how we make sure that our blogs say the right things, and all of those things are really targeted there. Because that's what we're going to do now. And then we're going to get better, and then we're going to add more stuff. So the way we're going to build an industry is we've started with the doctors. That's our wedge. We know the customers that are the best buyers for us, and we're going to wedge that way. But like, we're going to do some TikTok store stuff. Should I be involved in that? Probably not. We're going to do some stuff on Instagram Reels. Again, should I be involved in that? Not. But like, I went to a conference with a lot of founders where they said UGC, user-generated content. And I knew what it was, and 75% of the room starting AI startups didn't. And my point of that is, we run a consumer business that isn't in vogue, which gives us an opportunity to be able to do a bunch of stuff and try a bunch of stuff, because there's not 700 competitors. So we're building something, and I don't know what it's going to look like 5 years from now, but I know 15 years from now, everybody's going to have it in their shower. And I know along the way, we're going to have a lot of fun, we're going to do a lot of dumb stuff, and we're going to fail and succeed and, you know, drink coffee. So.
Well, I speak for myself, but I think probably everybody else here, very proud of you, Tom. Like, having somebody here in our community starting something that's in the consumer space, it's so hard. Making a market, there's so much alpha in making a market. It's like very exciting. Appreciate you coming and talking tonight and sharing your story and everything else, and wishing you the most success. And I need to re-up on my eye drops and my eye cleanser.
Indeed. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? I just have a question. And it's based on a post that you had made about how, like, after people get the prototyping grant, maybe there's another need for follow-on funding. Do you remember that post?
I don't remember the post, but I'm still me, so I can talk about it. So do you mind if I kind of wax eloquent about the BIA? Number one, it's the most important economic development program in the state. It's probably,
Bar none.
The prototyping grant is probably the best entrepreneurial program in the country for what it does. There's no bullshit, it helps founders. Okay. So the problem with the prototype grant are many, but I want to start by saying it really is number one. Number two, I can give you a whole list of stuff, but number one is this. Within the prototype grant, you're building a product. If you're building the right product, you should be talking to customers. So if you aren't getting paid to talk to customers, you don't. So you end up getting to a point where you get done and you don't have any customers and you have a product and now you're going out to sell and you don't have any money to rebuild what you did. So there should be some offset. There should be some specific pathways, which other states have done. Like Iowa actually has a pretty good program that allows you to spend some money on sales and marketing as a loan program. But there should be something that follows behind that basically allows you to hire up staff to go sell, to go understand, to do basically some of the insight that people would say you do in iCore or you do in some of these programs. But like those two are sort of divorced in the process, and it's like that's not really how you build a company. It might be how you build a product if you're in a company with 200 employees and you're thinking about, oh, we need to add this to what we're already doing, we understand our customers, but not for startups. Startups need that extra cash alongside. Now, I think groups like Move, I think Husker Venture, I think Maverick sort of are in a good spot because you can use that early stage capital that's really useful to be able to offset some of that, but it makes sense. So number one, I will tell you, your head definitely tells you that. So, you know, there's three things. Again, I'm a lawyer, so I always go like, here's my bullet points. Point number one. The first one that I would say, if you're a new founder or you're thinking about this, is practice a lot. Like, know what the questions are going to be and just practice how you're going to respond, so that when the question happens, you don't get lost in your own thoughts. That instead you're ready to go, so you can say, you know, that's a great question. Here's the way we think about that. Here's what we know about that. Here's what we're uncertain about. I think saying I don't know to an investor can be sort of a catch-22. Some investors like it and some don't. I tend to be a little biased towards being too truthful. And what I mean by that is, I would rather tell you I don't know the answer to your question, but I can get back to you on that. And as somebody who's invested, I would much rather hear that than somebody try to make something up as they're sitting there. Now, I also tend to walk around questions. So like, I have to be intentional. So we had a pitch a couple weeks ago and they were like, you have to talk shorter. And so I practice shorter answers. So I'm gonna give you an example. If you asked me what Peeq Pro did a year ago, I couldn't have said, Peeq Pro is building the ocular hygiene industry to dominate it. Full stop, 10 words. It took me 5 years to be able to do that. That sort of stuff is just practice. It's not like, oh, I got wildly smart. But when you say it, and you say it over and over and over, it comes off your lips, so you're like, yeah, we're doing this thing. That's impossible. But when you think about what I just said, it's impossible. And so some of it is you get so good at saying it and you believe it that it comes out as credible. So like the second big thing is belief. You have to believe what you're saying. So like, I truly believe everyone here should wash their eyelids. I'm not saying, I don't give a shit if you buy our stuff. Like, I'm worried for your eyes, legitimately. My wife comes home and shows pictures. I mean, so you asked about my wife earlier. My wife is a doctor. You should never eat dinner with my wife if she's had a day where she just, oh God, it's bad. But she comes home and tells horror stories about people that didn't care for their eyes earlier. I mean, we had a conversation last night about an 87-year-old that was recommended LASIK, who she's been treating for dry eye, and she said to him, I don't know his name, so I can't really reveal any HIPAA information, but she said, essentially like, dude, like, why are you doing this? It will make every single thing we've been treating you for 10 years worse. And it's like, that sort of clarity, I think, is important. So you have to have that belief. And then the third thing that I would say is you actually do have to do the work. So you do actually have to know the answer to a lot of questions. And so our average order value is $588. You know how we know? Because we figured out the number. So there is stuff that like makes you sound a lot more credible when you actually do know the answer to some questions that are legitimate answers that you can back check and go like, here's our math, this is where it came from, et cetera. But it gives you more credibility when you're a little wishy-washy on stuff where people will say, well, what's your cost of acquisition for a patient? It's like, it's a really hard number because we go B to B to C. So is it zero? Is it what we paid for the doctor? Is it the that's just a number that's hard to come up with because of our business model. And so you have to establish credibility with the stuff you know for sure. You have to be okay with the stuff you definitely don't know. And in the middle, you have to do a good job of explaining why this is a hard question and how I'm going to answer it in context.
So I'm kind of curious, your argument for your product, the business model, is you basically have to convince America that you need to care about their eyes. What is your cost of acquisition for a customer? What is your channeling for that? Like, what kind of, to me that seems like virtually impossible, incredibly expensive, and almost really not going to work. So
did you brush your teeth today?
What's that?
Did you brush your teeth today?
I did.
How much did it cost to acquire?
I didn't brush my teeth because some company 48 years ago created a toothbrush and changed all the idea. Well, and maybe they did.
You actually did.
What was their strategy? How much did it cost them? What was their customer acquisition? You know what I'm saying?
So Pepsodent is the name of the company. Started running ads in 1904. It essentially was in the social media of the year of the time, news magazines and newspapers. And it said, hey, guess what? Pop was invented in 1880 and all your teeth are rotting and your breath stinks. Sound similar to what I said earlier? I don't have to convince you. I have to convince the people that are most adversely affected, and you'll be caught up in the wave.
What's the cost of finding those people, and how do you target them?
Well, the cost to acquire doctors who see those people because they walk in and say, my eyes hurt, is about $900. So our wedge is the doctor. This is this is fundamentally the hardest thing we have to talk about.
I remember when we were talking, and I kind of realized this, I just never came to the top of my mind because I didn't have the problem myself, but from time to time I'm on a steroid for various things. Steroids make your eyes really dry, as it turns out. All of these allergy drugs, a lot of this, I get really bad allergies. My eyes are actually really messed up right now. I thought Tom was gonna give me crap about it. It's because of allergies. But the drops that make me feel better make my eyes really dry. And that's what I think is one of the things where how many of the pharmaceuticals and that I've had in multiple scenarios, then doctors bring up dry eyes, and I didn't quite know what that meant though. So that's where I think that there is something to be said about sort of like creating the upswell, focusing first on those people that need it the most. But and then of course I'm a guy who's just a computer nerd who's been sitting on computers and reading books for the last 30 years. So like I think my eyes are screwed that way too. So I remember when Tom was telling me about it, I was like, man, I think this is like maybe for me.
I can agree with all of that. My question is a little bit different than that. I'm really saying it's really expensive to change the attitudes of 330 million people as a company. And my question to you is, have you thought about this strategically? How would you go about doing that? Because like, if I was going to start my business, I wouldn't be like, I want to change all the attitudes of the country. I'd be like, I have this specific customer, I have this specific funnel, I want to get them in this funnel through it, and I want to see if it works.
So yes, I mean, this is why investors say no to us. Your argument is not one I hear it all the time. So I want to answer this. So the way we think about this is probably like 3 different things. I don't need to convince all of you. I need to convince influencers who will convince you. So like my teenage daughter will get on TikTok and she'll convince her teenage friends. But we have to be in a position where that happens. So who's the most likely to know the people that are on Dupixent, whose eyes hurt, et cetera? It's the doctor. The doctor is the wedge. The doctors don't know how to talk about this. They didn't go to optometry school and learn about it because dry eye has happened so fast that literally they didn't have classes on it until 2 years ago. And so we spend a ton of time talking and training doctors. And some of that is functional, hand the people the product, and some of that is, did you know menopause causes androgen drops that cause dry eye in your meibomian glands, and if they're on hormone replacement therapy, it actually is worse because they're taking in more estrogen that lights up your lacrimal gland. That's not Tom being smart, there's papers on this, but the doctor hasn't read it, so we have to write a short version and get it to him. So as we do that, doctors go, oh, this is a place I make money. So the doctor makes money on the cash pay for dry eye. And they start going, oh, this is really good. So the number one reason people go to the eye doctor right now is not blurry vision. It's their eyes hurt. It's not, I mean, it's just their eyes hurt. They don't say, is it dry?
And when your eyes are really dry and hurt, I can attest, it actually makes your vision seem like it's a little bit blurrier than normal.
It's like, you know, when you turn on your windshield wiper and you spray it, and you got a little grease or bugs or whatever, and it's kind of hard to see and it takes a while. That's basically your eyes every time if you have dry eye. That's why you can't ever, it's called fluctuating vision. So in the evening, in particular, people have fluctuating vision and they're like, oh, I need new glasses, I have allergies. They'll make all the excuses. It's like, no, your glands don't work anymore. And so all sorts of people have these symptoms and they don't realize what the symptoms are. So we wedge to the doctor convinces the patient, we start working around that patient, and then we pick off 4 or 5 audiences within sort of consumers that are highly influenced. So as an example, and this is just kind of a funny startup story, during COVID we had just made our cleanser. And so we had about that much. So if you go over and look at that table, there are about 20 bottles and we would test it. So like, how do we do that? We follow those pathways to go dance teams. So largest dance team company in the world is a company called Varsity Brands in Dallas. We happen to go to Techstars in Fort Worth. The guy who's the managing director lives next door to the head of Varsity Brands. So the goal isn't we're gonna convince every dancer, it's we're gonna convince Varsity, and Varsity is gonna get all of their clubs to do this. Does that make sense? So you get those wedges into consumer behavior, because you know what happens with girls who are on dance teams? They tend to go on TikTok and Instagram and show off everything. So that just spreads. So the first user of makeup in a middle school is a dancer. So it's like you push on those soft parts of the consumer market. You don't try to convince everyone. We call it beachheading, but you know, whatever.
I think that's good. Appreciate everybody coming.